Okay, so this has been one thing that's been like around for a bit, and like the DOJ government wanting Google to sell off their monopoly of Chrome in the web market. Um, so basically, it's because of Google's antitrust case, blah, 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 blah. I think we know for the most part what's going on, but yeah, just wants Google to sell off its Chrome browser as part of its final remedy proposal in a landmark antitrust case. It's also the part where Google can't go in and purchase, oh, being the default search engine in other web browsers. And look, Direwolves came back. But anyway, oh, so DOJ demands that Google provide a prior notification of any new joint venture, collaboration, or partnership with any company that competes with Google in search or in search text ads. However, the company no longer has to divest its artificial intelligence investments, which was part of an initial set of recommendations issued by the plaintiffs last November. The company would still be required to give prior notification of future AI investments. So they get to keep their AI investments, but they have to get rid of the web browser advertising and collaborations, basically. This would, again, people have noted that it affects the Mozilla funding and their billions. Through its sheer size and unrestricted power, Google has robbed consumers and businesses of a fundamental promise owed to the public: their right to choose among competing services. The DOJ statement accompanying the filing claims Google's illegal conduct has created an economic Goliath, one that wreaks havoc over the marketplace to ensure that no matter what, Google always wins. Now, this is kind of both true and what all, but the thing is, Google has a huge share of the marketplace, and it's in the literally in the vernacular that we use. When you say to go and search something online, you say go and Google it. No matter what search engine you're using, Google is synonymous with searching the web for something. You've also got the idea of Google Chrome. Everybody uses Internet Explorer as a portal to install Google Chrome. Google's kind of taken a whole market and brought it into themselves, and then you add on the smartphone market with Android and them requiring that every smartphone manufacturer basically use Google. That is where you start to get very antitrust and anti-trade. Is you've got an open source environment and people, or like an open source operating system like Android, and you're telling people you have to use Google on your stuff. We will pay you to do it even, but we want you to use this so that we're the default in backend instead of your own store that you would put on it instead. And thus we have alternatives like Calyx and Graphene born out of the necessity of having something that isn't locked into Google's ecosystem. So the DOJ formally brought its case against Google back in 2020, the most significant tech antitrust case since the DOJ's year-long battle against Microsoft in the 90s. The lawsuit alleged that Google used anti-competitive tactics to protect its search dominance and forged contracts that ensure it's the default search engine on the web, browsers, and smartphones. Because of the hold on search, the lawsuit claimed Google can adjust the auction system through which it sells ads and increases prices for advertisers and rake in more revenue from that. So advertising revenue through Google searches via Safari, Firefox, of course Google Chrome, and I believe Opera as well. There are quite a few that they are the default search engine in. And yeah, they like spend a lot of money to be that default one. And then through that, they're able to tailor the searches and do what they want with the search results, thus shaping a large portion of the population in their search engine. And the only reason Bing has a third of the market share is because default web browser, I'm too lazy to change. And now that Microsoft has Edge based on Chromium for like the last few years, it means that Bing's the default in that. And Bing, as it's based on Chromium, it's basically the same tech as Chrome for the most part. So, went to trial in 2023, and in August 2024, the U.S. District Judge for the D.C. ruled that Google has maintained an illegal monopoly both in general search and general search text ads. So they hold a large portion of the market, and yeah, through their payment of in buying out of other search engines, they have basically created a monopoly. They're basically getting the Bass Pro treatment, except Bass Pro wasn't able to go through with the purchasing of Sportsman's Warehouse and a few others because they'd already bought Cabela's and everything else, so they couldn't own hunting. Go watch that Fat Electrician video. It's actually pretty fascinating how Bass Pro got so, like, the way Bass Pro got so big. But anyway, and how they got the pyramid in Memphis. Counter proposal filed by Google in December. The company said it would structure its contracts to allow for multiple default search agreements across different devices so that Apple's iPhones and iPads might have different default search engines, change the length of its search revenue deals with hardware manufacturers to 1 year, rather than locking them into long-term agreements, and allow more flexibility around search in Chrome for Android phone makers. Well, being as Chrome is basically a system app in most phones, yeah, you basically get forced into using Chrome and not being able to uninstall it. Emphasize that its revenue partners like Apple and Mozilla have the freedom to do deals with whatever search engine they think is the best for their users. Well, the thing is, Google has big money backing it. And so everybody's going to go to Google because they've got more money than, say, DuckDuckGo or some of the others. Microsoft might be able to compete on the Bing end, but Google has some of that big money, too. So, yeah. Story updated in March. So, yeah, last month. Yeah, whatever. But what's really funny is some people came in and said that this is a bad idea. You've got a monopoly on lemonade because you pay all the grocery stores to be the default lemonade. So we're going to force you to sell your car. What's with the weird redirect of the... So it's on search engines and Chrome. Google is the default search engine in Chrome, which makes sense being as Google's the one, in essence, building it, but it's rebranded Chromium is all. The monopoly is directly caused by paying the grocery stores replacement, then stop that part. I believe they did end that part and pull that part. They can't, create deals that make them the exclusive part, but they also are pulling apart other parts that allow them to keep a hold on that. Has acted as one to maintain its monopoly for years. Google has secured default placements through distribution contracts that entered into agreements with browser developers, mobile device manufacturers, and wireless carriers. Many users simply stick to searching with the default. Google receives billions of queries every day through those access points. Spelled out quite clearly that being the default is a monopolistic part, and that's caused by paying for it, which is the self-perpetuating. As the placement is so valuable, the money generated by it pays for those default placements. So again, going back to like the Bass Pro deal, yes, Bass Pro would have been the one. Bass Pro owns everything for the most part in fishing. They were going to buy Sportsman's Warehouse after having bought Cabela's so that they could be in hunting as well. Then they would be monopolizing the outdoor sports scene. Now, they ended up going into tourism by buying the Memphis pyramid, and thus all the hauntings stopped because all the rednecks rolled in, and they became the redneck mecca. Now, what you run into is, let's see. So there's that. So you stop, in that case, the FTC basically stopped Bass Pro from becoming the monopoly on hunting and outdoors. Okay? But I think there were probably some other things that they could have prevented too in that acquisition, because Cabela's does a lot of stuff too, including a lot of outdoors things. They've got hunting and I think fishing as well, and boats, and yeah, Bass Pro would have basically been out selling stuff. And with Sportsman's, you've got a wide range of stuff as well that fall into all those categories where other brands can sell there. So this would be in line with, let's see, let's stop the monopoly by telling Google they can't pay certain or all companies to be the default search engine anymore. That was in the deal, I believe. A step further would be forcing browsers should ask users what they want their default engine to be. Now, that is telling other web browsers, other companies that's not Google, what they have to do in this situation. Which, I mean, yes, would help end it, but then this would be in line with how Apple is forced to allow for browser choice. So this is a thing where the FTC, DOJ went to Apple and said, you can't make Safari, force people to use Safari as the default browser. That's an Apple thing, and they went to do that. Now, if they told every other company that is not Google that they have to tell people that, or give people the choice of a default search engine and pick it as they set it up, then that would not be action directly against Google. So they're breaking Google's shareholding by telling Google you can't make these contracts, which is in essence the stemming of the issue. But now you're going to reach out and like penalize these companies for accepting the money that Google is giving them, where you could say they were the victims of such manipulation. But anyway, it's a straight line from problem to solution. A weird curvy-ass line between problem and solution is a strange solution that is being relentlessly proposed that Google should be forced to sell Chrome. Chrome is rebranded Chromium. It has a few googly things in it, but all you do is you tell them you can't develop Chrome anymore because that's also a lot of people use Google Chrome. So by saying you can't develop on the Chrome or the Chromium project anymore, then that means that it leaves it to the community to continue to develop it, and Google still defines standards in Chrome. So selling Chrome means Google can't define web standards and control the web. There's a recent round of news covering, yes, Google will have to part with its dominant Chrome browser if the US DOJ has its way. DOJ reiterates Google should stop paying partners for search placement and divest its dominant Chrome browser. Again, Chrome is Google's browser, yes, but Chrome is also the largest, has a huge share of the web browser market, and so the default in Chrome is Google. And this helps reduce the amount of search that Google has, saying that we're getting deeper into it. Chrome ships with Google as the default search engine because, they invest billions in Chrome, and that's how business works. But still, a more direct line from problem to solution is forcing default search engine choice, not forced sale of Chrome itself. Again, you're putting the punishment upon other companies instead of Google itself. What do I care? The sale of Chrome is bad for the web. I've written before that Chrome is unusual in that it's really only particularly useful to Google. Users don't pay for Chrome. There aren't ads in Chrome. There's no direct business model for Chrome, unlike Safari and Firefox. Nobody writes checks to Chrome to make a certain search engine the default. Yeah, because Google's directly involved with it. It provides value to Google. Whoever buys it doesn't inherit that same tangential value. They would need to redirect what little of it they can somewhere else, likely fighting against natural flow that has been baked into it since the beginning. Chrome is again based on Chromium, which is the open source version of Chrome. And so selling Chrome, you're just selling the brand that is a branded modified Chromium with extra Google proprietary stuff involved in it. This means that, again, Google can, because of the prolific nature of Chromium-based browsers specifically, Google, in essence, controls web standards and can force different websites and web standards onto people because, we're deprecating this thing. And there are hardly any other competing web browsers and web engines at this point that Chromium is basically the default across the board, other than like Ladybird and maybe, I believe, Gecko and Mozilla in Firefox. So selling Chrome means Google can't define the web standards as well, which means they don't hold a stranglehold on the web. I'm not saying Google shouldn't be forced to sell Chrome just because it's only valuable to Google, but I do think Google should be allowed to have a browser. Google's a web business. That's their whole thing. Again, they define web standards, and so they basically control it. They made a browser to invest in the web itself because what is good for the web is good for Google, and what happens to be good for us all, because they get to force us into certain web standards. Allow me to be more clear about why Chrome is good for all of us. When you look at anything on a digital device, you're looking at an operating system made by a private company who has total control over it. They have the right to do that, but that operating system exists to serve that company only and entirely. If you make a native app for mobile devices, it's the pleasure of companies who build mobile operating systems, and you do it with the technology they allow. Android is super different. Companies behind them and never going to shake hands and make it easier for blah, blah, blah. It's largely the same making a native app for desktops. While there's a bit of freedom in what you can install there, making a Mac OS and Windows app is two entirely separate endeavors. I feel like there's a lot of misunderstanding of what's going on in the back end here and how Chrome actually works. Not so with the web. The web is a set of protocols, languages, and file formats and other technology that congeal to make digital experiences. No one company owns or controls it. Okay, so with Chrome being in Chromium-based browsers being the large majority of the web browser share, in Google having large shares and portions in the Chromium project, it means Google in large part controls it. When you look at the web standards that have been pushed, Google has been pushing those web standards into Chromium. And then everybody else has to follow suit. Mozilla and Ladybird and a couple other smaller projects are about the only ones that don't end up being swayed by the Chromium project because Google decided it wanted to implement this one thing into it. Getting rid of Manifest v3, doing weird JavaScript stuff, or implementing material design and things like that. So everybody is pushed and pulled by Google. And so, yeah, Google does control it in a directly indirect way. If I go to a website on iOS, Android, and macOS, Windows, some Linux distro, Samsung phone, or whatever device, I have that has a web browser on it. It really is the same set of files, true and not true, that deliver that experience. You and I and every company in the world can build things once that go everywhere. Yes and no. That's how it should be. It's fair and efficient. It's good for the world. It's much better than a world where you're forced to build things only for companies' proprietary operating systems. Chrome has proprietary components in it, but the underlying Chromium project is open source. And again, Google has a huge stranglehold on the Chromium project as it stands. Google, by virtue of having Chrome, invests heavily in the web itself, not just Chrome the browser, but the web standards that power the web. Yeah, they get to define them willy-nilly, and they force it upon other people, and so they back things off for a little bit, and then implement it later on once all the flack has died down. I can't claim to know every detail of that investment, but I personally know people employed by Google that literally just try to make the web better all day. It's not hard to poke around the W3C specs themselves and see them littered with Google employees. There are evangelists and documentation writers and other people who aren't working directly on Chrome, but really the web itself. Will Google continue to invest like this if they are forced to sell Chrome? It would be hard to blame them if they did not. So again, I believe they could still contribute to the Chromium project. It's just you get rid of the Google branding from Chromium, and that's what you get rid of. They built the Chromium project. I don't know, okay. Web will suffer. Should Google be forced to sell Chrome? I think a fair assumption that overall investment and contribution to the web, open web will take a dive. Are you sure about that? Sure, there'll be some canonical forks of Chromium that keep the sure-to-be shunned buyer company out of it. Sure, the Linux Foundation is getting their ducks in a row to have contributors ready, but I can't see it going well. It won't happen overnight, but stagnation will set in. Stagnant web is incentive for the operating system makers of the world to invest in pulling developers toward those proprietary systems. Browser wars sucked, but at least we were still making websites. Being forced to make proprietary apps to reach people is an expensive prospect for the rest of us. Companies of the world, it would probably be done poorly, and we all suffer for it. Heck, those operating systems aren't required to ship a web browser at all. Whatever way this goes is bad for Mozilla. It's possible Google's forced to not pay them for default search engine placement anymore. But even if they aren't, you can imagine Google's appetite for cutting that check is severely diminished. 2020 layoffs that was publicly about reducing Mozilla's development still has me thinking they aren't entirely serious about pushing the web forward, particularly with much less help. So what's interesting is, let's see, things happening for Mozilla is also bad for the web, so another domino may fall. Diminishing investments in the web generally will keep knocking over dominoes. Now, what's interesting is Mozilla's layoffs, even the more recent batch of them particularly. When the CEO gets a huge payout check, but then lays off a bunch of people from the company, that's an issue, not an issue of funding, but more of an issue of being bad at management. I've done videos on Mozilla's blog posts and stuff like that, and stuff that they focused on, and they focused less on the mission and more on anything but the mission. Google does all kinds of stuff. They're surely the worst offenders of user surveillance on the web. Let's not let them off the hook on that. Let's see that DOJ gets involved in that stuff, but forcing a sale of Chrome is not the way. So how about we lump not having Chrome and also not having user surveillance into one package, because the search market also runs off of user surveillance. But anyway, there are a few issues in here. I think I've addressed them for the most part as I hit them. You don't really see any mention of Chromium until later on, and there's no breakdown, for somebody that's new looking at this, there's no breakdown of what Chrome actually is and there's only one mention of Chromium itself, and that just kind of feels okay. Yeah, co-founder, Code Pen, Dave Rupert. I'm the co-founder of Shop Talk, CSS Talks, and website. So you do Threads, Blue Sky, GitHub. Oh. Web designers and developers. Web designer and developer, co-founder of CodePen, a playground for front-end web development, social development environment for front-end developers, and developers ran the CSS tricks. So you do mostly front-end stuff. And yeah, Google defined the standards for CSS for a lot of it because they could force it in the Chromium project. And you're just asking for them to be the sole and compliant ones to define it. I'm not saying that Chromium can't be a defining factor, but when Google is the large one defining it, they are taking their picks and doing whatever they want with it for the most part, because now they manage a project, they maintain the project, and there's not really too much push, say that a lot of people have. When Google decides we want to do this, we're going to do it anyway. And so from a back-end standpoint, it just becomes I don't care. Well, there's a lot more to consider than just the front-end prettiness of everything. And I feel like that's the angle that was pulled off, especially in that blog post. If you liked the content, if you enjoyed it, if you think I deserve it, comment, subscribe, leave any criticisms you have or what have you. I appreciate it. Feed that algorithm, like I said, and I will see you guys in the next one.